Hey guys, what's up? So in today's video, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies, Little Women, and how each protagonist, so that's Jo, Meg, and Amy, explore feminism in their own unique way. So the first sister I want to talk about is Jo March. She's feminism in its raw, uncompromisable form, representing the opposite of what society wants her to be. From Jo's name alone, which is actually short for Josephine, we can see that she's shortening her name to sound less ladylike, rejecting traditional gender roles/names, and choosing her own independence. And this actually carries on to her aspirations. It's not just the fact that she wants to write, but what she writes about that truly cements her character and who she is. In a way, I actually think Little Women, and I'm referring to the book here that she writes in the movie, signifies everything about her femininity. Society doesn't want women to write, but she writes anyways. There's no market for feminist literature, so she creates her own market. And most powerfully, in a time when women typically couldn't own anything, Jo insists on keeping the copyright and ownership to her book at the end of the movie. But that's not to say there's no pushback from society, especially regarding marriage, which relates to my next point. For women during this time, marriage was sort of seen as this canon event, with 93% of all women being married compared to just 50% today. Even in literature, Dashwood tells Jo to make the girl in her story either marry or die, which would be a pretty outrageous statement to make today. However, Jo prioritizes her freedom way too much to get married, which she explains to Laurie. And when Meg's getting married, Jo says how she would rather paddle in her own canoe than get married. But in my opinion, her views range from progressive to pretty childish, depending on how you look at it. On the one hand, she's way ahead of her time by trying to forge a path for women and initiate reform, but this is also a pretty privileged take to have because most women weren't able to read or write like her and had to resort to marriage just for survival. Oh, and one more thing. I know you're gonna say that she marries at the end, but hot take, I'm in denial. That's not true. Because in the screenplay, it literally hints that it could be a fictional ending. And I think that's just what happens in the book and not to Jo in real life. Because if you think about it, it literally makes no sense based on who she is. And I'm choosing to interpret it in a way where she's just trying to satisfy Mr. Dashwood. So the next character I want to talk about here is Meg, and there's actually a lot of nuance in how her character is able to portray feminism in the most traditional setting out of the three sisters. Based on societal expectations, Meg is actually the perfect wife. She's the prettiest girl in the room, behaves in a very ladylike and agreeable manner, and respectfully is the least gifted out of the three. Throughout the movie, we can see how she thrives in these extravagant suitor parties and is easily able to pull a wealthy husband. But Meg's feminism lies in choosing not to do so. Despite her hating being poor and being the most receptive to wealth out of the sisters, she marries John, a penniless tutor. And it's this nuance that defines her feminism, not the act of her marrying, but choosing to marry someone contrary to societal expectation that sets her apart. In her speech to Jo, she says how just because our dreams are different doesn't mean they're unimportant. And this can be interpreted in how they explore feminism in contrasting ways and how neither one is wrong. Lastly, I want to talk about Amy, who is the ice to Jo's fire. She's also my favorite and, in my opinion, the most complex character because she's clearly as intelligent and talented as Jo, but also understands and accepts the fact that the best path forward for her and her family is to marry a wealthy suitor. In her speech to Laurie, she states that for women, marriage is an economic proposition. She is feminism in its most practical and strategic, fighting to win the system when Jo is trying to tear the system down. Amy realizes how she is constrained by the gender roles and expectations of her time, but still fights to reach a socially desirable outcome on her own terms, which you can interpret it as her sort of feminism. This is why she marries Laurie, not only for love, but for financial security. You can also make the argument that she is the smartest but least feminist out of the three, and this reflects an uncomfortable truth about society because it shows how fighting for feminism and women's rights in a time like this is simply unrealistic, and oftentimes the smartest and most realistic option is just falling back to the status quo. So I actually spent a lot of time trying to think of a creative outro, but Most of it just turned out to be hella cliche, and I don't want to waste your time.